excited to talk to a room full of people. So thank you for being here and thank you for having me. So to give you an idea of what I want to accomplish in this talk is just a brief outline. I want to just give you a brief introduction to human evolution and kind of how we can say what we can about past diets and what I think the insect portion of these past diets look like. And then the bulk of my talk is really going to be focused on the sexual division of labor. How we can reconstruct in the past what the men and women were doing, how that was different, and why that's important to our understanding of human evolution. And then lastly, just because I have the opportunity, I want to touch on and discuss in the Western world from an anthropological, from an evolutionary perspective, just so we do with some kind of thoughts and useful kind of action items going forward. So first off, human evolution, you're used to seeing the diagram on the left. This is actually called the March of Progress. And as an evolutionary anthropologist, I hate that diagram. Progress is an awful word to use when we're talking about evolution, and especially even with human evolution. Evolution isn't linear. We aren't always adapting to be better. We're adapting to unique environments. And so kind of how I correct it is by giving it a temporal aspect. So in the corrected diagram, that star is representing the last common ancestor between us and chimpanzees, which existed about 5 million years ago. And then the other branches, the other hominids in that diagram, don't make it all the way to the top. So only the living, extant organisms are at the top of the diagram, so that's us and chimpanzees. And then the other hominids that kind of led to us are branches off that tree. And so these are only representing some of the diversity. It gives you kind of an idea of some of the hallmark stages of human evolution. So it's a good diagram to use when I'm talking very broadly about it, but I do like to correct it and remind you that it doesn't necessarily work in such a linear fashion. So looking on this diagram, this first hominid between chimps and us is meant to represent the genus Australopithecus, or Australopithecines, the hominids that are closely related to that genus. These are upright walking apes, basically. Their brain size is about the same as chimpanzees, but they're bipedal. And so for us who study the fossil record, there's no doubt they're related to us because this is an incredibly unique adaptation. And so as soon as we see it in the fossil record, we know we're related to them. For their insect portion of the diet, we actually know quite a bit about them compared to other hominids. We have bone tools from the site of sauropods in South Africa. They're about 1.7 million years old. And these have been studied extensively by myself, but previously the research I followed up on was done in the early 2000s by Backwell and Errico. And basically we have these artifacts from the site, but then we can create our own tools today, like create bone tools and use them for different tasks, like digging tubers out of the ground, stripping bark off of trees, processing fruit, tanning hide, and digging into termite mounds. And the best match of these microscopic wear patterns that we can see on the ends of the artifacts and on the ends of the experimental tools, best match digging into a termite mound. Termite mounds are very finely sorted, right? It's all very similar grain sizes of the sediment in there. There's no rocky inclusions. And so we get a very narrow striation and very parallel striations, kind of showing the motion that is represented in that animation to dig into that termite mound. These tools look like just a little bit step further than what we see chimpanzees do when they forage for termites. Chimpanzees often use tool sets. So with those hominid tools, they probably dug into the mound, but then they might have needed something else to get the termites out, like a thin, grassy stem that the termites, the soldiers especially, could bite. And when the soldier bites that stem, you can pull them out, and then you can actually eat them off that stem with little risk to yourself because those pinchers are already closed. They're kind of unidirectional. And so once the termite bites that stem, they don't open again and bite you. So it's a really amazing mechanism that chimpanzees use. And so chimpanzees, they don't dig into the termite mound, but they do use a set of two tools. And so this video, this is Maya. She's from the Republic of Congo. And she approached the termite mound with a big heavy stick. And you can watch, she's pushing into the harder outer crust of this termite mound. And once she breaks it, she takes a second tool that she carries to the mound in her mouth, and then she starts the more classic fishing. So when we're reconstructing what these early hominids were doing, we're thinking it's like this, but maybe to the next level. Maybe now with those digging tools, they can get to the larva and get different nutrients from these termites that the chimpanzees don't access today. But one question I'm asked then is like, well, how do you know there were termites around 1.8 million years ago? Well, we found a termite mound. So at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, another Australopithecine site, we have a beautifully preserved termite mound. It is, there's an ash layer, a volcanic ashfall that is beautifully preserved this mound and has preserved all the organic material in it. And me and my colleagues have looked and we can pull out lipids from this termite mound and identify it to the genus level. These are Macrotermes termites. They are the termites that chimpanzees prefer to eat. They are termites that people prefer to eat. And so we know that they are on the layer with these hominids. So do we know the hominids were eating them? Not necessarily. Those are things that we have to kind of theoretically reconstruct. And one of the things we looked at is the fact that we have what we call this isotope conundrum. I'm going to show you that slide in a second. But basically, the hominids are eating resources that are different. They're what we would call C4 resources, where we're using stable carbon isotopes. So a large portion, almost 50% of the hominid diet, comes from a C4 resource, and we can tell you that these termites would have contributed to that. I did not say that hominids were eating half their diet of termites, but the press picks things up, and that's what went around. This isn't published yet. This work is not published. It's been presented at conferences, and it was a conference talk that got picked up by the press, which might be why they were a little more liberal with that title. But we also know that when we're communicating our work, the press will always use that clickbaity title. So anyways, this is just the kind of the data to show you that conundrum I'm trying to fulfill with looking at this termite resource. So chimpanzees, they eat diets mostly of fruit, and they supplement with leaves. And so they're eating woody plant materials, and that gives them a C3 signal. Hominids have about 35% or more, up to 50% of their diet coming from what would be grassy signaled foods. Now this can be the animal that eats the grass, and then hominid eats that animal. But in these early hominid stages, they don't have the tools to be hunting. So we know half their diet is not coming from meat. So we know there's got to be more resources contributing. One of those resources is likely termites. And so that C4 signal is likely a wide variety of foods, but I do personally like to focus on the insects. The next phase of evolution represented in this diagram is Homo erectus. This is the origins of our genus, and with the origins of Homo erectus, hominid body size starts looking more like ours, or they can be up to 6 feet tall. Brain size jumps the most significantly in the course of human evolution from those earlier hominids like the Australopithecines to Homo erectus. So when we're thinking about Homo erectus diet, things must be different. We have to support this large brain. It is energetically expensive. It requires a lot of fatty acids. So the diet of this Homo erectus must have changed. So the chimpanzee model doesn't work anymore. So now I start looking at modern foragers, because what the tools that the Homo erectus has is representing incredible complex forethought in order to create what the kind of yellowy stone tool there is a hand axe. And it's what we call bifacially flaked. It's worked on one side, and then it's flipped over, and it's worked on another side, and it's worked back and forth. And we have thousands of these hand axes. So Homo erectus was great at making this type of tool over and over and over again. So we know they're all equally capable and smart enough to do that. So then it starts giving us more complex thought than we had seen previous in the archaeological record and in the fossil record. And so we now need to start thinking about them as how they use their environment is going to look a little bit more like modern foragers. So people today, or actually people today have a hard time living this way. Most people have adopted some sort of more modern parts in their diet. But a foraging diet means that they survive entirely off the land. And so there are correlates with foraging diet. You can only have a very small group size. If your group size gets too big, you're going to outstrip your resources really quick. So we stay in what we call a band level society. That band level society must be mobile, not only to move for resources, but a lot of networking between local groups, because when kind of disaster strikes, when a food resource isn't available, these bands will come together and help each other out. So there is a lot of mobility in kind of maintaining those relationships. These groups are also egalitarian. You might have some like that the elders are a little bit more revered and they have a little bit more prestige because they have knowledge on how to find that food, and that keeps getting passed down. but in general, you don't have strong power divisions. But what we do have a division of is sexual division of labor. Men and women do things differently in predictable ways in these foraging societies. And so from this paper, Ilner and Nell in 2000, they're talking about the Mopani worm in southern Africa. I love this quote. It says, "It would appear that considerations of gender cannot be excluded from a discussion on entomophagy in terms of what is consumed and who is involved in gathering the insects and the processing of insects." And so this is really kind of the quote that led me to do this research and to put this together. So what the sexual division of labor, the predictable patterns are, is that women go after resources that are more predictable. Actually, what we say is they have a lower risk of acquisition failure. By putting the effort to go out to those resources, your chances of bringing that resource home is very high. They also do activities that they can carry their kids with them, so they can do it while nursing, or carrying a kid, or have a kid running around, right? And they're not putting that kid in harm's way. And then lastly, it's they're doing these activities while not only do they have those kids around them, but they generally might be pregnant or they might be nursing. Because in these foraging societies, they are naturally reproducing. The only form of birth control they have is what they can do with the rhythm cycle, or while they're lactating, they're not able to get pregnant again. That's really the only form of birth control in these societies. So in the prime of a woman's life, she generally is pregnant or lactating. So we have to think of the activities she does encumbered by her reproductive physiology. Men, however, do the more riskier tasks. They go and hunt the prestigious big game. They are celebrated when they bring it home because everybody gets to feast, because you have to eat it all before it goes bad. And so there's a lot of prestige and sharing that comes, and so we focus a lot on how important meat is. But it's not just meat. Men will go after honey, because honey is actually pretty high risk. You have to climb trees to get it. But even like mushrooms that grow on the sides of cliffs. If you look at mushroom foraging between men and women, they target different mushrooms. So because we see this pattern so strongly in all foraging societies, we look for a theory that unites them and why it would evolve. And there's two hypotheses, two prevailing hypotheses. The first one's cooperative provisioning. This says that with men and women targeting different resources, they don't get in each other's way, they're able to more efficiently exploit the environment, bring it home to feed their families. The conflict model says that, and I don't like the name of the conflict model, it's just what it's called, but the conflict model is trying to insinuate that men and women have different conflicts with their environment. We have different needs, and so we're going to go after different resources. So the big difference between these two things is cooperative provisioning suggests a nuclear family, a home base, somewhere to bring resources home to. That is a modern human, or at least a Homo erectus level pattern. The conflict model does not necessarily have to be a modern human condition. This could be any animal organism has conflicts with the environment that might be different based on their sex. But when you talk to paleoanthropologists, they tend to focus on cooperative provisioning because we're so focused on meat. We look at these foraging societies, we look at how men bring the meat in, and then we're like, oh, cooperative provisioning, that explains all of the diet of human evolution. Not necessarily. Depending on the food resource you're talking about the population, a lot of different variables, cooperative provisioning isn't always the best answer. So I wanted to test it kind of with the literature we have. So looking at ethnographic examples to show you that we see these patterns. First, an example from southern Africa, the San. A good quote, when foraging, women may stop and eat termites all day. Right? It's a big social activity. They come across a productive termite mound, they're going to gather some and bring them home, but they're also going to enjoy some social time and sit there and eat them. So that means women are eating more termites than the people they bring them home for. So not only are they the ones collecting, they're eating more of them. And so the San eat termites, caterpillars, grasshoppers, beetle larvae, ants. Right? So termites aren't the only thing they eat, but women go after most of them. The Ante are in Paraguay. They are, the women go after the insects here. Women spend a dedicated 15 minutes a day looking just for these beetle larvae. So a lot of them are palm weevil larvae and other similarly closely related species. And then anytime they're encountered, they will collect them. Men will use these beetle larvae because they can be semi-cultivated, right? So you cut down a branch of a tree to get some palm hearts or something else you want to use. And then you know you can go back there weeks later and the larva is going to be there. So men, when they're going out on their hunting trips, will often pass one of these logs and gather some larvae for their kind of their lunchtime snack. But in general, it's the women who collect them. They also tend to eat them more. And then in Australia, an example from the Aranda, a quote from Bodenheimer: women accompanied by their children carry digging sticks and go out in search of small fauna, including social insects that are available year-round. So social insects, termites, ants, really easy to find in large numbers, but caterpillars, not social, but during the time of year when they're reproducing, available in large numbers. And so they tend to focus on those. So to test this division of labor, we can prove there is definitely a division of labor, to test the hypotheses behind it. I set this up. If insects provide nutrients important for female reproduction, and if non-human primates, if the non-human primate females also consume insects more than their male counterparts, then the conflict model is actually the best fit model for this division of labor. So just quick, these are the nutrients that increase significantly for women when they're pregnant and lactating. So we tend to think of men needing more protein because they have more muscle mass, but when a woman is pregnant or lactating, her protein needs exceed that of mass. And so that's a nutrient we focus on a lot, but B12, calcium, folic acid, prevents spina bifida. These are important nutrients for reproductive women. And so the real paleo diet, the thing I want people to know about the real paleo diet is it's highly variable. It is variable regionally, so what you're eating up in Europe as a forager versus what you're eating down in the tropics as a forager is going to be very different. It is going to seasonally vary, and it's going to change daily based on what you were able to find. But when we're trying to figure out if these insects can fulfill these nutritional demands that women have, we should look at more than one insect and what's available year-round at different times, and they're going to kind of collectively fulfill those needs. And so just really quick, those nutrients exist in all of the insects that these women were going after in these foraging societies. So this is just collated from published research. But a good example from the Amazon is that insects provide about 12% of the crude protein derived from animal foods in a men's diet in one season of the year, and it'll provide 26% of a woman's protein in that same season. So women are eating these insects a lot more than men. But the question is, what about these non-human primates? That's the other part of testing this conflict model. So what are they doing? Well, it's actually chimp females that are the experts, right? I showed you that video of Maya. She was my best tool user in the Congo, right? And so here, though, you can see this is Glitter. She's at Gombe in Tanzania, and she is nursing her juvenile daughter while she's fishing for termites. And then, so actually, this is one of my favorite stories. Glitter went to go termite fishing, and I'm close. I mean, I'm this close to them. And Gossamer, her daughter, starts freaking out. Right? And this is my first time with these chimps. I didn't know if I was causing the distress. No, she was just hungry. I witnessed a chimpanzee temper tantrum. Right? So then Gossamer feeds while her mom termite fishes. But when she's done, she gets her own tool and she practices termite fishing. Here she is modifying the end of that tool so that it works well, and she's learning this from being by her mom. And the female juveniles stick closer to mom longer, and so they are the more proficient tool users across chimpanzee societies. We also see similar patterns in orangutans. They have a similar diet to chimpanzees. They have primarily fruit-based diets, and they supplement with insects, and it's the females that go after these termites more than the males. But we also see it in gorillas. Gorillas have leaf-based diets. They don't need protein from insects, but micronutrients, and even like the anti-nutrients and things that can bind to tannins, almost medicinal purposes for these gorillas, and eat such a leafy-rich diet. We see the females go after insects more there as well. And then in other order, across the order, Old World monkeys, we see it in mangabeys and langurs. In New World monkeys, we see it in capuchins and spider monkeys. Some of the smartest monkeys there the females are going after insects more than males. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but the list is limited. And it's because we know a lot more about the great apes because they're bigger. And they are easier to see, and especially tool-using chimpanzees. People are fascinated by tool use. We have an abundance of literature on that. So unless the researchers are specifically wanting to study the insect portion of the capuchin diet, the difference. So this supports my conflict model, right? This is not a human condition that females eat insects more than their male counterparts. And so actually fossil evidence for this anthropoids, the monkeys, the apes, and us. The ancestral anthropoid was an insectivore. The diet was based on insects. We can tell that from the fossil evidence. But as the anthropoids diversified, they started adding more fruit to their diet, and then more leaves. So the pattern that females eat more insects than males has been going on probably since they started adding other foods to their diet. Think about this risky male. The risky male's like, I'm going to try this fruit. And the female's like, I'm going to eat some more insects because I know it's good. Right? There's a little bit of risk that goes with adapting a new diet. And so this pattern probably goes all the way back to about 50 million years ago. So today, I like to tie us to today, right? So we're talking females eat the insects more than males. But when we do like bug events, right? Men are the more adventurous eaters. The men going after the bugs more in our society. There's some documented literature, I didn't put any citations up, but most of us have seen that. That's because men are still rewarded for being risky, right? It's still a thing, right? There is prestige that comes, there is attraction of mates to the man who did something that was a little bit risky. And so in our society where we don't eat bugs, the risky thing is to eat the bug. So it's a flip of the pattern, but it still fits the story. And so just to wrap up, I wanted to add why though. Why is that risky? Why is that prestigious? Why is that, attractive that guys might want to eat bugs here in Western society? So we have to figure out why they're disgusting to us. Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, Europe, which is the heart, right, of Western society, so any of us who consider ourselves part of the Western world have a colonial history, right, from Europe. So Europe was under ice until 18,000 years ago. The Neanderthals that were living at that time in this region probably weren't eating bugs, right? It wouldn't have been a reliable food source to them. We know that insects are largely a tropical resource. And so when we're thinking about our attitudes here, we have to think about the deep history of food in Europe, and then it didn't include a lot of insects. There's of course a couple citations that you can look at. But in general, especially by 1492 when Columbus was sailing the ocean blue, there was no insects in the diet in Europe. So why are they disgusting, right? So yeah, you don't have the right environment, so you don't eat them. But why are they disgusting? It's because of ethnocentrism and othering that comes with that kind of age of exploration. To define ethnocentrism, basically we tend to judge others by our own standards. We don't think we choose the wrong thing, ever, right? Like, if I do something, I probably put some thought into it, right? Or other people in my society told me that's the best thing to do. So somebody who does something differently, we automatically judge and go, well, that's not how I do it. And I know what I do is probably right because I wouldn't do it if I knew it was wrong, right? And so then we judge them. And we call that othering, right? It's only something other people would do. And so with that point of view, when the age of exploration happened, when Columbus and the explorers that followed him came to the tropical regions, came to the Caribbean, they encountered people eating insects. And this is something that they had never encountered before. And that idea that it's different from what we do, and the only insect eating that these Europeans would really have been familiar with would have been maybe what their chickens were eating in the backyard, swine were eating, other animals they saw. It was a thing they attributed to beasts. And they used that same language to describe the indigenous people they encountered. They described them as beast-like. And we know what happened. We don't talk enough about it, but we know that colonial history actually enslaved these individuals, decimated their culture, removed them from their lands, murdered them, all of these things, and they used the fact that they were like beasts, which edible insects was an example of, as part of the reason to justify that behavior. So that's why they're disgusting, right? But they want to say that the disgust is real, because psychologically we develop our disgust triggers when we're children. And if you have kids, you know prior to 2 years old, they will put anything in their mouths. And you have to teach them what not to put in their mouth. And how they stop digging in the garbage can or how they stop playing in the toilet is because you've told them that's disgusting, ew, gross, stop. And so when they hear that reaction from bugs, they develop that same psychological disgust. So the thing that I like to send you away with is this idea of don't yuck my yum. It is my new favorite phrase, don't yuck my yum, right? So don't yuck my yum just says, don't say what I think is delicious, don't call it disgusting, right? And I like to think of this, a good example of this for me is reheated French fries. Gross, right? But if I think about why somebody might reheat French fries, it might be because they spent money on that food and they can't afford to throw it away. Why did they reheat it in a microwave instead of an oven, which might have saved them a little bit? Because they have to rush to their second job, right? So when I yuck that yum, I judge them for their socioeconomic status, for their position in this world. And it's the same thing with insects. When we yuck somebody's yum, that they like insects, we just judged billions of people in this world. We just othered them, we just called them primitive, we just called them savage, just like we were colonial Europeans. So it's a heavy topic, but you can go, no, yuck my yum, right? And so that's what I try to incorporate into my kind of insect eating events. People go, ew, gross. And I go, hey, I'm going to give you this idea of don't yuck my yum. Like, some people need this food to survive, and you just kind of maybe reduce their access to it by sharing that opinion. And also, if you had a kid nearby, you just program them for life that they're going to have that same reaction. So if you have that reaction, fine, but let's try to raise the next generation where this is a viable option. All of this is in the book. My book is available for sale. I will be signing copies of the book tonight at the reception, and I'm happy to talk to you all about this. We probably don't have time for questions because we are running a little late, so I just want to say thank you. Thank you.